Farmers, and particularly growers of fresh produce, have an important role to play in ensuring that our food safety supply is safe and free of contamination in order to protect their customers and the general public. Many produce growers today have a basic understanding of where foodborne illnesses come from. In fact, many are already using best practices on the farm in order to prevent them. But in spite of this awareness, thousands of people still get sick from contaminated produce each and every year. Of course, there are many points in the food supply chain for contamination to occur after produce leaves the grower. But it's important that all growers, regardless of size, are educated in the best practices to prevent microbial contamination and cross-contamination in their farm operations. Beginning in 2011, a new set of food safety regulations were adopted called the Food Safety Modernization Act, or FSMA. FSMA is the first mandatory federal standard for the production of fruits and vegetables in the United States. FSMA sets the standard for growing, harvesting, and packing of produce for human consumption and requires farmers to integrate specific food safety practices into their farming operations. FSMA regulations don't apply to all farms right away, but at some point between 2018 and 2024, the rules will apply to all farms except for the very smallest of operations. And that's why we feel it's important to offer this training for growers of produce now. GAPS and other guidelines cover things like providing bathrooms to workers, requiring workers to wash their hands prior to returning to work, and preventing animals from entering the packing house. In this video, we'll cover key points of produce safety that relate to both GAPS and FSMA. Of course, a 10-minute overview won't substitute for more in-depth training, but it will highlight key points and practices that you can learn in greater depth in upcoming classes and future videos. We encourage farmers to use this video as a training tool for current and new employees. It will help explain the whys of produce safety that you will require on your farm and will support your goal of producing safe, healthy food. Okay, let's dive in. Most of us think of clean food as safe food. We wash it, we eat it. But because fruits and vegetables are often eaten raw, the first burden of food safety lies directly on farmers. Here's what we know. Produce provides an optimal environment for many pathogens to reproduce because it has the right levels of moisture, temperature, acidity, and oxygen. Plus, many microorganisms can exist on the rough surfaces and growing environments of plants and produce. And some of these microorganisms, called pathogens, can make us sick. What is a pathogen? A pathogen is any microorganism that can be transferred from the farm to the consumer and cause illness in humans. For produce safety, we must protect against three categories of pathogens: bacteria, viruses, and parasites. Let's take a brief look at each. First, bacteria. 66% of all foodborne illnesses are from bacteria, including E. coli, Salmonella, and Listeria. Bacteria are literally everywhere, on clothes, hands, and in the dirt, and can survive and multiply outside of a host. We can reduce the risk of bacterial contamination on produce by cleaning and sanitization of food and food contact surfaces. Second, viruses. Viruses can only live and multiply within a host like a human or an animal. Hepatitis A and noroviruses are famous for being transmitted by people who are sick at work or who do not wash their hands properly. The good news is that viruses can be easily controlled with simple but highly consistent hygiene practices. Parasites are the third type of pathogen. Like viruses, parasites also live in hosts, but they tend to be transferred through water and wet environments. So unlike viruses, washing is not the only solution for parasites. Because pathogens cannot be seen or felt, produce contamination is difficult to detect outside of a laboratory. So the strategy farmers must depend on is preventing contamination in the first place. And because each farm is unique, each grower needs to evaluate potential sources of contamination and implement policies and procedures in a way that makes sense for their own operation. There is no one-size-fits-all when it comes to food safety practices on the farm. For now, let's quickly cover the 5 most common sources of food contamination. Humans. Humans are the central ways that contamination can move around the farm and can be the most difficult to control. So, proper training of employees relative to their specific positions, be it harvesting, packing, or operating equipment, is key. Employees have the most influence over food safety, but visitors and volunteers can be a source of contamination as well. Animals. The presence of animals on the farm poses unique risks due to animals' ability to be carriers of pathogens that affect humans. Intrusion of animals into farm fields and packing areas can be a source of contamination. Domestic animals, such as pets, and wild animals each pose their own unique risks. Water. When you think of all the ways we use water, irrigation water, hand washing, post-harvest washing, as well as unintended uses including flooding, it's easy to see how water has the ability to spread contamination widely and rapidly. Water is a primary cross-contaminant around the farm. In future videos, we will go into more depth on issues surrounding water, as well as the difference between agricultural and post-harvest water and associated risks. Soil amendments. Importing of soil amendments onto the farm can introduce contamination. Of particular concern is raw manure and unprocessed amendments that come from an animal origin. Tools, equipment, contact surfaces. All surfaces that contact fresh produce pose a risk for cross-contamination, including harvest tools and containers, tractors and implements, packing house surfaces, equipment, and boxes. FSMA also includes some administrative requirements such as monitoring, documentation, and record keeping. In these videos and future trainings, you'll learn how to develop convenient and user-friendly tools to help you easily document food safety practices. Using a systematic approach will allow each farmer to organize policies, procedures, and actions, and develop a thorough food safety plan that is specific to your farm. Food safety takes a commitment from each farm and farm operator to prevent foodborne illnesses every single day. Best practices for produce safety will soon require farms to perform mandatory record keeping and inspections in order to be compliant with FSMA. This Viva Farms video learning series and other training opportunities will offer the information and tools you need to ensure your farm profitably produces safe, healthy food for many years to come.